lecture. I'm Jill Huerta. I'm Executive Director of the Center for Graduate Life, and I'm so thrilled to have you join us for this talk today about preparing for an international STEM experience. One of the things we'd like to do is to thank Burroughs Welcome Fund, who provided a grant that is funding the STEM Communication Fellows program and all of these lectures that are open to the whole community. And one thing we'd like to emphasize is that STEM has become so much more broadly defined than it used to be. In fact, our colleagues at Burroughs Welcome Fund who provided the grant told us they had even coined a new acronym a new acronym for STEM, which was strategies that engage minds, and that they consider any kind of work that uses the scientific method, forms a hypothesis, and then uses data to confirm or disprove that hypothesis is something they consider STEM. So I hope you'll kind of spread the word about that to your peers in other programs. So people understand that you don't have to be in a STEM program to benefit immensely from these lectures. However, while I have a lot of STEM people in one place, I do want to take a moment to encourage you to come to the future STEM communication talks. Next week, we'll have a talent acquisition manager from LinkedIn talking about how STEM students can network effectively. I'd also like to encourage you to come to our Accelerate to Industry talk tomorrow, where we have the Senior Vice President of Executive Leadership and Chief of Staff to the CEO of Novant Health, Kim Henderson, talking with students about the 7 ingredients to career success. These A to I, as we abbreviate it, these A to I talks and these STEM communication talks are some of the highest quality talks I've seen us offer in my 2 years here. So definitely something you shouldn't miss. Finally, I would like to encourage all of you to sign up to participate in 3-minute thesis. You have until October 30th or October 26th to register to compete in 3-minute thesis. The first prize will earn a $500 in prize money. So that's a little more incentive for you. And there's cash awards for second place and third place as well. So maybe, Aura, you could chat out some of these links for events that I've just been talking about. Well, I introduced today's speaker. I'm so fortunate to be able to introduce Ivanna Campbell, who is the executive in residence of the Center for Graduate Life. Ivanna has had a highly successful career that she began on Wall Street, and I like to say we're fortunate that it brought her to Charlotte because this eventually led to having her work with our students. She also has quite a bit of international experience herself to inform some of what she's going to say today. And I know you're going to go over that, Ivanna. So without further delay, just thank you for joining us today. And we're anxious to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you for the warm welcome. So first, just to start off, can everyone see my screen and my presentation in front of them? Just want to make sure. Okay, very good. I'm going to be able to start. Okay, just to tell you a little bit about my background. I know Jill alluded to it a little bit, but yeah, I have a background in financial services. I started working on the global high yield trading desk in New York, so quite the global experience from the very start. I remember going in at 6 a.m. New York time, and then by the time we were coming in, London had already been in the office for a while. And by the time we were done with our long day, we were passing over our trading book over to our colleagues in the Asian market. So, a lot of my experience has been working with a lot of global firms and collaborating with, colleagues across across the world, really. I came down south after working in New York for a while to actually focus in international business. I went to the University of South Carolina, and they had a pretty good program in international business. So that really acquainted me with Charlotte, and Charlotte being a big banking center at the time, and even today, even growing more so. So I discovered Charlotte and settled in Charlotte and worked in just a wide array of senior executive roles, basically at Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and a few other local financial institutions as well. I also served most recently in performing work around mergers and acquisitions, especially the HR and the people integration piece of all this for the London Stock Exchange Group. They were in the process of gobbling up a lot of financial data firms, and one of the firms that they acquired was actually located in Fort Mill. It was called Mergent, and they provided information that would fit into their indices and data like that. So I helped coordinate the integration efforts for that M&A. They also bought Yield Book and just a lot of transactions that had to be managed on a global scale. As a consultant, I've done a lot of work for LendingTree, FMC Lithium, and through my consulting company, expanding the book, but really having that focus on international strategic, people consulting. And, Jill mentioned that I actually grew up as the daughter of a diplomat, so from Argentina. So my dad was in the Foreign Service. I grew up all over the world, which, makes you a rather unique person in that, we were moving every 6 years. So I had to pick up and move. And we lived all over, so I was born in Argentina. Then we got sent to Rome, Italy. One of my brothers was born there. Then I have another brother that was born in Hong Kong because my dad was sent to Hong Kong. And then we went, as I was going into the 4th grade, my dad was sent to Sydney, Australia, and just grew up as multicultural kid, picking up every 6 years. Finally settled in the U.S., but there were some more assignments, that I had experienced in the Philippines and also in Frankfurt, Germany. So really grew up, bilingual. I understand Italian and I speak Spanish, and just really had quite a unique kind of experience, for better or for worse, growing up. So when I saw the opportunity to speak on this topic, I was very excited because I think just given my background, having worked with a lot of global companies, it's something that I feel very, very passionate about. So let's talk a little bit more about, we have students here today. I was looking at the roster a little bit that have, STEM PhDs, STEM masters. And really, when you're looking at the current job market, and I mentioned this before in previous presentations, a lot of doctoral students and even masters in STEM, the academic job market right now is tenuous at best. So really, for the first time, in quite a while, the actual private sector employment is increasing and catching up with the employment sector in academia or educational institutions. So really what this means is that if you are, postdoc, PhD, and in a STEM field, or you're getting your master's in mathematics or another STEM field, really the opportunities that you have outside of academia will be just as equal and just as strong. So that ability to be able to focus on your job search and opportunities in industry will be really critical. So this just shows a little bit more what I was talking about from a numbers perspective, some of the work, and this one focused on PhDs, but the story is pretty similar with a lot of the masters in STEM fields and where the opportunities are rising more. I love to do a lot of research, again, for STEM STEM functions and where they're landing in industry, even if you go internationally, and the roles that you probably have heard of already if you read a lot of journals or just the latest articles in a lot of the labor market right now, opportunities around data science, working in the tech field, doing user design interfaces and research around that. There's a lot of demand for technical sales, medical application scientists, consultants, even medical writers, or individuals that are being able to work as project managers in those specific STEM functions within industry are areas that are growing exponentially, and that's where the demand is really, becoming quite strong. So when we think about what employers are looking for, really, you have to think about not only having that expert knowledge, right, in your particular field, whether it's architecture or computer information system, or nanoscale science, whatever your specialty is, that's a given. You have to have that set of skill sets. But really that ability to communicate in a multidisciplinary, across the board at all levels of any organization, whether it's industry, nonprofit, academia, is critical. And I've said this and I'll keep saying it in all my presentations, that's what sets you apart from the rest of the candidates in your particular fields. Your ability to also manage projects effectively, be a problem solver, be entrepreneurial in nature in the way you manage your projects and your research, and really having that global competency. So that ability to collaborate across borders will be really critical, especially in the next few years. Undoubtedly, COVID has thrown everything for a loop right now. So even right now, as I'm saying this, if you're a U.S. citizen or a citizen of a lot of countries, we're limited in where we're able to go on vacation right now. So bear in mind, we're all aware of that we're living in kind of very strange times. But even though we're in the middle of the pandemic, I do feel that once we overcome this, I'm confident that we're going to see a resurgence in the demand for going international, because the benefits are just priceless. I'm not going to read the bullet point for you, but essentially the 21st century and the careers, some of them might not even be defined or exist yet, are going to demand that you not only have that technical knowledge, but that you're able to bring perhaps that international experience, and that'll give you that edge. There's so many companies that have that global presence, or even research institutions that collaborate internationally. So being able to prepare and consider an international opportunity will be a competitive advantage for you as a potential candidate, in your job search and your opportunities in the future. One thing that I found interesting in doing a lot of the research to prepare for this presentation is that according to a research study by the University of Florida and the University of Chicago, so two really well-renowned universities, they analyzed 1.25 million STEM papers that were published from 1996 to 2012. And a global perspective actually impacted the study and the paper's ability to be noticed and published, which I thought was really interesting. The results from this study really suggest that scientific papers whose co-authors represent multiple countries, so if you have a multicultural research team, based on this study the University of Chicago and Florida did, you will have a higher chance of being published in prestigious journals and being frequently in research articles than people when the team is more homogeneous or from the same country. So I found this statistic very interesting, and you can see the numbers there, which is from the National Science Foundation. It's really interesting to think about that. Your ability, even if you don't go into industry or you work for multinational, say you're working on some sort of project that has international implications, your ability to partner with a global team will up your chances of that paper or that research being noticed more, being better funded, being able to, get bigger grants. And at the end of the day, gain, more of a global recognition, and maybe, through a global organization be recognized more. So that's something to keep in mind. That's one of the advantages that I thought I would mention to you as we're diving a little bit deeper into this. One important thing is you're preparing for really any sort of international experience. It can be an international STEM experience, or I say this a lot to managers that I consult with when they're trying to get people ready for an expat assignment as well. There's really some key questions that you should ask yourself before you even, consider taking on a global assignment. You really think this, because these are really critical for the long-term success. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there's statistics where to say that a lot of I don't want to say failure, but a lot of the challenges when people do accept international assignments is because they didn't go back and ask these critical questions, or they didn't do their homework at the beginning. So they end up facing either obstacles along the way, or disenfranchisement, or just kind of a regret of sorts of going abroad for their experience. So these are, again, the critical questions. Do you have the necessary skills? That's a no-brainer. Do you have the family and support, right? And we'll talk about global mindset and what that means, but you need to have that support to be able to take, whatever it is, a 6 to 9 month, or even if you want to during the summer, and be able to accept and go on to that international opportunity. Is this experience going to really add to your career advancement, right? Not to sound opportunistic, but you want to make sure that this is something that's going to add to your resume, whether it's with an organization that you highly respect, whether it's in a country where perhaps you have background yourself in, or language, or something that ties back into your resume that justifies the decision to go here, to go to the particular location. So you've got to be thinking strategically about that, not just accepting the assignment for the sake of accepting it. So really think strategically, how does that fit into your personal story, your CV, or your resume? And then you want to look at tied into that a little bit is the short-term objective of accepting this role, and long-term, what's your play, right? What are you looking to get out of this? And what's your ultimate goal, whether it's to work for, an international agency or to work for a large multinational, or getting to the management or industry side of things that way. So you want to be thinking, okay, what's my intent here? Do I want to be an expert in Europe or Southeast Asia? Or, how do you tie that into your entire profile? And then one of the most important things, of course, is the financial support, right? So to go abroad, it's challenging enough to do research sometimes domestically. But if you're going to go abroad, have you lined up, your funding, grants? How are you going to fund your stay over there? Sometimes there's limitations on what you can do outside of your research or the internship opportunity that you have. So be practical about that and plan ahead, because again, all these ingredients will feed into you being, successful in this role. So ask yourself these questions even before you're looking to click the apply button, would be my advice. And really, I tend to be a very step-by-step. I did a lot of work in project management, so I love my arrow charts, but really think about it in a very concrete step-by-step way as you're preparing for an international assignment. Now, before you even set foot in the host country, think about, and we'll go into each one of these in the presentation, but really developing kind of that global mindset, researching and doing your homework about the host country, thinking and anticipating what some of those cultural differences might be, researching the customs, the behaviors of the people that are in the target country, and the deeper dimensions of, that cultural diversity and identity of that region that you're going into. And then once you're in the country, right, we're going to talk a little bit about acculturation and what that means, right? So once you're there, how do you navigate that curve and all the steps that are very normal and most expats or people that accept global assignments go through? How do you adjust your communication style and the way you collaborate with teams and adjust to the speed and the criteria that are more dominant in that target culture? And then how do you kind of apply that knowledge and bring it all together to have regular check-ins with a mentor? So this is kind of very foundational, very basic roadmap, but this is how you really should be thinking about it, sequentially as you prepare for the assignment. So really, when I think the first one, the first little bucket I mentioned is developing that global mindset. So really the key here is around adjusting expectations. So I think you want to go in with realistic expectations of what the adjustment period is going to be like, but not too high in that it's going to mean that you're going to be, dissatisfied. So as you do your homework, realize that there's going to be a time period for you to adjust, anticipate some of the challenges that you, and be realistic in your expectations. If language is going to be a struggle, you can polish up on that, but, work your way through and give yourself time to make sure that you're not setting yourself up for frustration, I guess is the right word. The second tip that I have is really study. I mean, I'm a big nerd about doing my research and homework. So, read and listen to related blogs and books and podcasts and ask what cultural norms do you notice about this particular region or country? Are people more likely to function in a way where they're early, on time, late? And we'll talk about that a little bit as we look at cultural models. What are some of the gender expectations? Their gifts between, partners and teammates? How do they view certain customs and ways of doing, either business or research or any sort of collaboration? Really, at the end of the day, comes down to collaboration, right? No matter if you're in a nonprofit abroad or a multinational, or even in a university abroad, is how do you collaborate with your global teammates? The third tip I have is really trying to find cultural mentors. So if you're part of a club or some sort of organization already, or it's part of your background already, or you have friends or acquaintances or professors that you've worked with, really try and find a target culture mentor who either has been there or has had experience working in that region of the world, and really be authentic in your questions. Really ask this person, what a normal team meeting looks like. How does staff or teammates, relate to each other? What are some of the challenges that they've had? Really kind of do a little interview and a little bit of homework. And that'll be the same mentor that at the end of this journey, hopefully you can continue kind of that check-in process, right? And you can kind of check in with them and get their feedback and have almost like a loop feedback process that you can have with them. really do kind of a check-in, like I said, with a mentor, but also assume the best, not intent when you're there. So there's a good chance, actually, a lot of times, disagreements or miscommunications is just because the cultural wires have crossed. And we'll get into some examples a little bit later. So be positive and assume the best when you're in the new situation, developing that kind of global mindset before stepping into the new country, and really take time to explore. So try and find a new experience every week that you can participate in, and really navigate through some of the nuances and be open to that. Obviously, learning the language. There are some cultures where my experience has been, and even if you say a phrase or two phrases, or you've shown an interest in learning some basic terms, that goes such a long way in building goodwill and people's ability to want to interact with you. The worst thing you can do, and Americans have a kind of a bad reputation, is assuming that everyone speaks English and assuming that we're going to go in there and it's like, hey, I'm American, I'm here. That really turns off a lot of people at all levels I've seen. So your ability to at least take a course or expand your knowledge of the language will be really helpful. And social support, without a doubt, that's a big one as well. So these are just kind of, when you're researching the host country, these are what I really call the practical aspects of research. These are really the host country characteristics, and you should be able to find a lot of this information rather easily through travel websites, through resources at the university, at the library, or even through the Department of State. So this is information where, this is self-explanatory, but you need to do this. This is what's on the surface. And we're going to talk about the cultural iceberg in a little bit, but these are the things that you need to know about to be able to have intelligent conversations with your teammates as you're interviewing for the international position. These are just elements of the country, like the social and business etiquette, the geography, their economy, some of the current affairs that are going on, their cultural values, what's the political structure like, who are the key players, the infrastructure. These are the no-brainers you need to know. You need to have a good holistic view of the region or the country and do your research on this in order to, integrate. It's really just going to help you integrate faster into the host country, even if it's a summer internship or even if you're going to be there for a year or longer. Doing this background homework and having that view will help you. And here we go. This is one of my favorite visuals. When you're preparing for an international assignment, it's important to think of what a lot of people in social sciences call the cultural iceberg, right? So we're all icebergs, even as human beings too, right? There's what you see on the surface, and then there's what you have underneath, right? And this is a well-known concept, and global managers know this, diplomats know this. I mean, anyone that works with multicultural teams is aware of this. You've got the basic elements on the top, right? Which is what I talked about a little bit earlier: the food, the holidays, the language, the literature, kind of those key practical things. But then on the bottom, you've got the deeper elements of the host country culture. And I personally believe, and just based on research and managers that I've worked with and just personal experience, that really the success to thriving abroad in an international role is while the top is important, it's like you have to know that, right? You have to know when their banks are open or what language they speak, but it's really at the deeper level, understanding the communication style, right? Their concepts of time, of family, of future versus, long-term versus short-term mentalities, the notions of leadership and how they define that, their approaches to decision-making, their power structures, how they problem solve. The deeper elements of the host country's culture, I think, is what will allow you to succeed and be someone that either they want to hire permanently abroad, or you'll be able to bring that back domestically once you're done with the assignment. So just be aware of that. Some of you might know this already if you've taken globalization class or a course or social science, but it's something that we have to be aware of as we're looking at international experiences. So this really talks about a little bit of the cultural differences, obviously customs affecting behavior. And as we look to prepare and figure out how we have to behave and communicate in a host country, it's critical to understand the major characteristics of the country really at the national level. So all cultures differ at the national level, though many of them display remarkable similarities. You'd be surprised to others. For example, German and Dutch, there's more similarities, Italian and Spanish, Finnish, and Estonian. This is based on research that has been done. And cultural experts, such as Edward Hall, who defined the concept of monochronic and polychronic cultures, have gone to great lengths to really classify or categorize national cultures in order to facilitate their study. So when you look at customs and formality and the special customs that a lot of different countries adhere to, it really does affect how you should be communicating, right, with those groups. Things like the style of dress, the view of time, the tolerance for conflict, the gender roles and expectations, even something as simple as the concept of space and personal space is very different in very different countries. So if we look at this, it goes without saying that these cultural traits, there's going to be exceptions, right? So as I'm going through this and talking about countries and regions, yes, there's going to be exceptions, but the purpose of these general classifications is to highlight some of the dominant traits. So as nations become diverse and more heterogeneous, we have more immigration, right? It's going to become even more challenging to classify them. But to understand this, as you're thinking about your host country and having a feel for how do they view time and how do they view work and communication, do they lean more to polychronic or monochronic? It's going to help you as you're trying to get, a job there and an opportunity there. So we're going to use an example, a very simple example of a traveler, right? You may have gone through this if you've traveled. And the traveler becomes frustrated when they go through the customs official and they see that the customs official is taking way too long to stamp their passport and help them pass through the body scanner. So the official moves at a snail's pace, right? Because other teammates keep interrupting him and his phone keeps ringing and he's multitasking and he's kind of thriving in that. But the traveler just wants to get through. He wants to have that one task be finished, stamp your passport, I want to move on, right? Where the official, again, is trying to manage the people, the situation in they're very different style. So in this really basic example, the traveler is a classic example of a monochronic person. And the official is more polychronic. So the monochronic individual believes in, finishing one task at a time. In their time culture, time is really a valuable commodity that shouldn't be wasted. And they want to stick to one task at a time, and they want to ensure that it's well managed. The monochronic culture schedules one event at a time in an orderly fashion, but in the polychronic cultures, and we'll talk about some countries that fall into that, employees can work on several tasks at the same time, and they thrive on carrying out more than one task at a time as long as they can be executed together with a natural rhythm, so they kind of thrive in that. For example, it's perfectly natural for the official to stamp the passport and take a phone call at the same time because these tasks kind of require different parts of the body, same level of communication and concentration. So these are some of the differences. And here on the slide, you can see, so this is going to tie into a little bit more. How do you work in the team? How do they view that time? This is a pretty large way that cultures or differences in countries are categorized. And this is to give you an idea. And again, this is based on research. We've got the source there. There's been a lot of writing in social scientists that have done work around this. But just to give you an idea on the spectrum, right? Because it's a spectrum where different countries fall in types of views on time. So one question that keeps coming up is, well, can you adjust easily to that, right? When you're preparing for an international assignment. And it is really certainly possible to acquire kind of a new time orientation, but it takes time and an open mind. There was research done by the Harvard Business Review that said that 10 to 20% of American managers that are sent by their companies to work abroad had difficulty actually adjusting to local cultures and norms because of this difference in the view of time. So if you're trying to build a business or work on a research project in a predominantly polychronic country, right? And you're coming from a monochronic country, or your style is just to be more monochronic, that's going to be something that you're going to have to adjust to. And a savvy student or a postdoc, PhD or master's, or anyone that wants to be working abroad has to be able to acclimate to the culture of that host country to thrive and really to stay sane during the entire process, because you're trying to drive out results, you're trying to put this research together, you're trying to partner, and you might have teammates that are on a different wavelength. So you've got to kind of coincide that and adjust your style to be able to fit into that team a little bit better. Really, if you're able to become familiar with where your region or your host country falls within this kind of time continuum, it's going to allow you to really improve workplace communications and team communications and save money and time. It's going to allow you to manage expectations and deadlines better, because if you're trying to motivate a team of research or scientists that are trying to deliver, and you've got these conflicting views based on where they're from, you're going to get frustrated pretty quickly if you're not aware of that. And I think in the long term, it'll allow you to build stronger relationship within your team. It may be difficult to adapt to a new time orientation sometimes because of the different values and meaning in the culture. Because in polychronic cultures, the concept of time is more fluid, whereas the concept of time in the monochronic is something that's a little bit tighter and seen more as a scarce resource. So just be aware. And again, these are just generalizations. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, based on research and studies that have been done by cross-cultural social scientists, this is where some of the countries fall. Another prominent cultural scientist, and you guys may have heard of this guy if in undergrad you took any sort of social science class or even psychology, was Gerard Hofstede, and I'm probably kind of butchering his name, even though I've said his name so many times. So he was a Dutch social psychologist. He also worked for IBM, so he had practical corporate experience, and he was also a professor of organizational anthropology in the Netherlands. And he was very well known for his pioneering research on cross-cultural groups and organizations, and developed what he called the 5 dimensions of culture. And he was able to map different regions of the world and countries based on these 5 dimensions, right? It's really a cultural compass of sorts to understand these kind of global. He passed away recently, not too long ago in February, but his work about cultural assimilation and mapping a lot of countries is work that a lot of expats, and when I say, expats, you guys probably know that acronym, but it's expatriates, right? So it's people that take assignments abroad with a lot of global companies. This is something that managers, when they're about to send someone abroad, they give handouts to their expats to read about this. So it's not something that's academic and non-practical. This is actually useful and information that you need to be aware of, and it's given to, people in business all day long when they're preparing for international assignment. So it continues to be quite prevalent. We've got the concept of high context and low context. I'll go into that in a little bit. Is your culture or your target country more of an individualistic type culture or collectivistic? How do they view uncertainty and risk? Is it more about saving face? Are they risk takers? Or is it more about maintaining on the surface, kind of the status quo? And then if they disagree with you, it's more behind the scenes and you hear that feedback differently. It's not to your face as much. Their view of masculinity versus femininity and gender roles, that's still huge, and that still divides a lot of cultures. And their orientation or their view of the future, right? Are they very short-term focused thinkers or long-term? And sometimes that correlates with the state of politics and economics in a country, unfortunately. If you're trying to survive and you're in an emerging country where you've got infrastructure issues or civil unrest or things that are just fundamentally challenging, you're going to be more short-term focused, right? Because they're trying to survive, or trying to the social upheaval. Whereas countries that are more developed, they have, I guess, the privilege, right, or the luxury to be able to think more long-term. So that's just be aware of that, be cognizant of that. And this is just a description, a little bit of each one. So individualism, collectivism, I think that one's pretty straightforward, right? Is it a society where it's more for the better of the group, right? Whereas societies that are more focused on individual and independent. The power distance is a huge one that divides the world quite a bit. So what we mean by power distance is there, social classes, are they very well, kind of defined? And is it hard to move between power structures and social classes, And there's differences in a lot of countries where, if somebody is, say, the head researcher of your team, and depending where they're from or what country you might even be running this research out of, that role will be very fixed, right? And they're the authority, and people accept that authority with no question. Whereas if you're more of a lower power distance country, or you're coming from a place where it's more meritocracy, it's more on a first name basis. That authority role is more fluid, and it can exchange, and you can have people leading during certain times of that project or that research. So there's more of a fluidity on how reporting relationships and organizational structure and power is viewed. So when you decide on that country, you apply for that position, think about, well, how does that work in that country? Are they more collectivistic? Is the power distance more rigid? Just be aware of these concepts. Uncertainty avoidance is another one. We talked about it a little bit. So that's risk, how do they view risk, masculinity, femininity, and the long-term and short-term orientation. So again, these were set, years ago, and they continue to be pretty good ways to map on a general level, our world. If we look at low context cultures, just to tie it in a little bit more to, communicating, right? When you think of a low context culture, what you say is exactly what is meant. It's have you ever spoken to someone or had friends? I know in New York, I had friends from all over. And I remember even the way sometimes if we're working for projects, you would have someone that would come out and give you their feedback, and there's no other way around it. This is what it is. This is what I need. Straight to the point. In their messaging, right? Those people in general tend to have or come from more of those low context cultures. So really it's the words that carry most of the information in the communication, and that's it. It's explicit. What I say is what it is, very direct, to the point that sometimes if you're not used to that, it can come across as kind of abrupt and rude, right? If you're more of a high context culture person. So I grew up with a mix because of my background, but I remember when I was in school in the US, and I was still interrelating with some of my, either Italian or Spanish family from Argentina, and I would go to, with a certain question, it's almost like you're being too direct, right? So there's conflict there even on the personal level and work relationships as well. So in high context cultures, it's really the context of the message. So am I smiling when I'm delivering the message? Am I looking at you in the eyes? What's my standing in society or in the negotiating group that we're a part of? What's my level of expertise? What's my language? What's my education level even? What's the tone, the tone of my voice when I'm communicating with you? What's my body language? Am I leaning forward? Am I really into delivering this message? So in high context culture, it's not necessarily what you're saying, but it's how you're saying it. And sometimes you can be delivering very intelligent comments, but if the way that you're communicating turns that person off from that high context culture, they won't listen to the content of what you're saying. They'll get caught up in that. You'll be surprised. And so really it's less information on the verbal part and more information in what you see around, right? So just to put it in kind of a basic graph for you, that's really what it means. So again, as you're getting ready, even to interview for an international position, right? Do your homework and what part of the world are they in? When they ask me a question, how do I balance that of the content with the way that I'm communicating that content? Because you'd be surprised, people form an opinion rather quickly during an interview, the first, 30 seconds or so. So it's, it's how you present yourself to. So just be aware of that. And this is an interesting, again, continuum on where some of the countries fall, right? And I'll be curious when we do the Q&A if anyone agrees or disagrees. And again, these are generalizations. You're going to have someone who's Australian that maybe is very curt and very direct in the way they communicate, right? But generally speaking, based on research and surveys and studies that they've done, this is where, kind of that a culture communication context comes in, just to give you an idea. And this is just, again, a little roadmap. And this is all from Hofstede's research, and it's from a great book that I'll be using in a communications class. I'll be teaching cultures and organizations, and it maps out, again, kind of individualistic versus collectivistic, high power distance versus low power distance in general. I think what will be interesting to see is that as we become even more globalized and more heterogeneous within these countries because of, movement across the boards and even more immigration, I think a lot of the lines will start to be blurred with definitions. I think it's always interesting to look at the different countries and see where they fall within these parameters. So these are some more countries here: tolerance, uncertainty, feminine and masculinity, and long-term orientation versus short-term as well, which is interesting. And as a reminder, that's tied into usually the economics and the politics of the country. That's huge. It really affects that orientation. This is another fun chart that kind of brings it all together, because this one's pretty new. The complexity of merging corporate cultures in mergers and acquisitions. It comes down a lot of times to the people. Are you able to integrate the people? You can have good deals, but if you're not able to integrate your human capital, you're not going to go much of anywhere. So as the focus on this has become more prominent, the Lewis model popped up, right? And this is kind of the latest mapping of global cultures that has gotten quite the global recognition. It was actually developed pretty recently in the 1990s. So it's the newest kind of cultural mapping model. And it was also articulated in Richard Lewis's book, When Cultures Collide, that I suggest as a must-have reading. It came out in 1996, but it's very prevalent today. It won a lot of awards just based on the research. So what Lewis did is, after visiting 135 countries, and he worked in more than 20 of them, he came to the conclusion that just humans in general can be divided into kind of these general categories based not only on their nationality, right, but really on their behavior and where they fall relative to that. So if you are going to be traveling or working in a particular region of the world, it's good to keep in mind in general kind of what the key characteristics are. And what he named these typologies were: you can be either linear active, multi-active, or reactive. So his model is really based on, was drawn from 50,000 executives. So he took 50,000 executives across the world in major Fortune 500 global companies, nonprofits, international agencies, and he had them do kind of these residential courses, and he delivered 150,000 online questionnaires to 68 different nationalities, right? So from a research perspective, it was well received as, being viable. It had the right sample size. So he created kind of this tripartite sort of classification. And again, every time I talk about these and mapping countries, right, as you're getting ready to take on a new international role, they're all distinctive, these categories, right? But they each possess kind of behavioral elements from the other two categories. So that's why the colors kind of fade. So, there's a merging there of sorts. But we're trying to look at what's most dominant, right, in general. So based on what's more dominant, that's how he mapped them. So if you think about the linear actives, right? So look at the blue box down there in general. Again, more task-oriented, highly organized, a lot of planning, pre-planning plan. I know if you're trying to set up a meeting or something, I want to know the dialing number like 2 days before. I need to have it. And I like overthink, sometimes even over preparing, but kind of that's one of the characteristics. They complete action chains by doing one thing at a time, usually in sequence, preferably in accordance with a very linear and organized agenda, right? So if you're going to communicate to them, that's what's most appreciated, I guess, in general. With the multi-actives, they tend to be more emotional, loquacious, impulsive. They attach great importance to the relationship, right? So do you get along with your coworkers? How do you communicate? How you're doing as a team through your feelings and people in general. So to them, in order to get something done, it's through people. It's through getting the consensus. It's through working at the angles of the participants in the room. So if I don't get along with you on a personal level, it's going to be very hard for me to effectively work with you on a team. So those groups, the multi-actives tend to function that way. So when you're thinking about communicating with them, as you're thinking about your target country, where do they fall within that? The reactives, they tend to do, like I said, they tend to do things a lot of things at the same time. So they're great multitaskers, the multi-actives, and they thrive in that. So they don't necessarily like the sequential kind of linear nature of an agenda or a meeting, but they like to extrapolate and connect dots and really be able to be thinking about, multiple tasks or projects or ideas at the same time. Now, the reactives are really good listeners, usually rarely initiate action or discussion, but they prefer first to listen and to establish the other person's position, and then they react to it and form kind of their own opinion. And then again, there's going to be exceptions. You're going to know someone who's maybe from one of these countries and they don't act like the Lewis model says. But in general, as a roadmap, this is the classified, or this is classified these individuals. And if you look at the map, it's really interesting because the linear active groups are, if you look at the mapping, it's really the English speaking world, right? A lot of times North America, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Northern Europe, some of Scandinavia as well. A lot of the reactive groups tend to be in major countries in Asia, right? Except the Indian subcontinent, which is more of a hybrid. And then the multi-actives are a little bit more scattered. So you've got Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, India and Pakistan, and Slavic cultures as well. So even though these cultures are wildly diverse geographically and in their religions, their beliefs and their values can be categorized, based on this behavior. And I think that the nature of at least understanding this or being cognizant of this will help you. And sometimes when we think about exceptions, sometimes what breaks some of these models are functions as well. So you'll have some individuals deviate from this kind of national view or kind of cultural on work they do. For example, engineers might be more linear, salespeople might be more multi, just the nature of the function, or if you work in marketing. So again, be cognizant into what industry you're going into, right? And the professions and the people that you're working with as well, because they might not fit, the model as easily. But I thought it was a good visual representation on where different countries fall or different regions. And this I thought was really interesting too, because you have the different subsets and we all need each other, right? So all the different groups, if you're managing a team, right, or you have to come up with a global team and you're having to recruit either for a research project or you're a manager trying to pull in through multinational subsidiary or something, a team from different areas, it's good to know kind of what these different groups are really, really good at and how they can create the ultimate team if they're brought together and what they're really most proficient at. So I thought this was a good way of mapping, if you need someone who's going to be more your project manager, your hard driving, the deadlines guy, putting together the Microsoft project or the platform for you to deliver a deliverable, you're going to want to score highly organized, linear, active sort of individual or team, right? Now, if you need to get everyone excited about a new project and pitch an idea and sell and market, and get the energy in the room going at 100+%, generating kind of that enthusiasm, that's going to be more your multi-actives, right? And then in terms of creating consensus and deep analysis and thinking before you speak, right? Because not everyone has to be the one that's talking all the time or the one getting everyone excited about a project. You need the ones that listen maybe more and then they analyze behind the scenes. Then you want to pull in teammates that are more of that reactive background. So again, this isn't the end all be all. These are just tools and, concepts for you to at least be cognizant of and be thinking about as you integrate yourself into a global assignment, a multicultural team, even if the team is located here in the US as well. How do you pull the best from people depending on their background and on what their experience has been? This is more of a basic cross-cultural cluster. So what we've done here is a lot of social scientists have conducted cross-cultural studies, and they're really focused on multicultural differences. So they've created these kind of geographic country clusters. So as you're looking at, in an international position, it's good to start. I would think that first you want to kind of think of, well, where are they regionally and geographically, and then where are they relative to the maps and some of the models that we talked about, and how do you adjust your communication and your work style based on that knowledge that you've done, the research on the target country. I just thought this was an interesting, good visual to kind of see where a lot of the countries that we have assignments in fall under. Well, an important thing to talk about too is around, ethical issues that might come up and communicating. And as you think about some of these, ideas of different approaches to time and to risk taking and to interpretation of messaging and what you're saying, you really want to make sure that you're aware of teammates or coworkers and their approach to some of these cultural differences. And then you always try and serve as the leader, right, within the group, or at least the one that's going to try and coalesce the differences within the group, because I think those are the people that end up being, the most valued and probably the most in demand. So your ability to bring everyone together and maximize the strengths of all the teammates, whether, again, you're in a research team or an industry, I think that'll be key. So just be aware of how some of these cultural differences can make people react, depending on what their background is, whether it's avoiding altogether or being more accommodating. If you're in certain cultures where it's more not as reactive, you might have to probe a little bit deeper to get someone to give you feedback, because they might not be wanting to give it to you as openly in front of a group. So their communication style might be more where they want to talk about it behind the scenes or get back to you more one-on-one. So just be aware. I think it's just being aware of our differences and how different things make all of us tick differently, right? So just be culturally sensitive and culturally aware of that as you're working with, teammates from different parts of the world, or even from just different cultural backgrounds in general, especially as you're looking at ethical issues as well, which are top of mind when you're talking about research and publishing, and definitely in the private sector as well. Is it more of negotiating, compromising sort of setup, or collaborating, problem solving? Just be aware of that. When you enter any sort of new environment, and some of you guys may have studied this already, I certainly went through this multiple times, and all the places I lived and moved, and even when I took a lot of projects with, coworkers in London and in Asia too. We had calls at one point with friends and coworkers in Malaysia. Just your ability to navigate, whether it's an assignment or the way you communicate with different parts of the world, is really important. So as you're going through what they call the acculturation process, you arrive in your host country, just be aware that this is normal, and that most expats and people that are in new assignments for longer than several months go through this. I mean, they've mapped it because it's a given thing that everyone goes through. So there's a process of kind of adaptation and integration to a new culture. And there's really different distinct stages. And it could be whether you're visiting, like I said, or even formally immigrating to a new country, or professional international assignments. And everyone goes through this, what they call the kind of the culture shock. That's more the layman's terms for this. So just be aware, once you're in the host country and you've done all your homework and you're aware of, the models we talked about and where your region and your country falls within this mapping, how are you navigating in a constructive way this kind of cultural adjustment process, right? So really, if you really think about it, it's multidimensional because you have different outcomes. So there's really certain outcomes that you want to strive for. And the ones that we really want to strive for are really assimilation and integration, right? And I put the big red X there to highlight that separation, segregation, seclusion, and marginalizations are the big no-nos. And the moment that you identify that you're falling in those red X areas, that's when you need to take a step back and say, okay, where am I facing the obstacle? And it could not only be you, it could be a teammate of yours, right? What if you're part of a team? Say you're going to an assignment abroad and you have other students that are coming from other universities, right, that are doing the same thing as you, but they're coming from somewhere else, and you're seeing them face the same obstacles or face the similar obstacles and be falling into one of these categories. You want to be able to step in and help them, right? And help your team or help somebody else that might be going through this acculturation process a little bit more negatively than you. So assimilation, definitely that's a positive. That means you're taking on the new culture's beliefs, their values and norms. Your individual, characteristics to really integrate yourself, right? Many groups tend to merge and form new groups. And this is really what creates the melting pot. So this is more for permanent, but even for you as an international assignee, assimilation is really just going in there and, embracing, not necessarily changing, who you are and what your values are, but being culturally sensitive to what's important and what's dominant in that target culture, in that target country. Avoiding ignorance, right? Making sure that you're aware and you're self-aware. And I think that's critical. Integration, similar to that, right? So it's when the original culture identity of a group is maintained, but at the same time, the group is integrated into kind of the larger group with good relationships and functioning. So those are all good. And on the negatives, I mean, I'm not going to dive too deeply because they're still self-explanatory, but with the negative, it's really more where you just don't want to, you want to self-isolate, right? So if you're in an assignment, you're just going to go and hang out with the rest of the American expats, or you're going to live in certain areas where it's just, it's the people that you identify with because they're from your same background. And that's really self-limiting. And sometimes it may feel more comfortable to do that. And expats sometimes fall prey to that too, where they, you go to American school or you live in the American neighborhood and you're really limiting yourself. So just be aware of that. Same with segregation, so separating yourself and kind of creating your own group. That's never a positive. That's never a positive outcome. So just be aware of the negatives. You're driving for assimilation, integration. There's going to be frustration as part of it. But I think, if you've done, your homework and you've done the prep work, it should be, pretty positive for the most part. And this is just a visual representation of what I talked about a little bit. So identifying with the host culture relative to where you're coming from as well, right? So one thing that I've learned being the hodgepodge that I am with my background is that it makes you more flexible. So being exposed to different people, working with people who are different from you, stepping outside of your comfort zone. Maybe you might be thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't take that assignment. I don't speak the language. Step outside your comfort zone, because I think that's where we grow. I think when things are comfortable, that's when we start to stagnate. And when we surround ourselves by like-minded people and people from our same background or the same degree program, I think that's where you kind of miss out. So again, push yourself, step outside of your limit, get uncomfortable, and you'll grow from that more, These are some of the stages about, communicating, and I touched upon this already, but really just be culturally literate, view the differences as an opportunity. We have our challenges even domestically in our own country with these, but avoid really cultural ethnocentrism, right? And you probably have heard this term before, but that idea that where you're coming from is the way it is, and then everyone else has to adjust around you. A lot of Americans have, we have bad reputations around that around the world, especially American expats. So it's the managers that do well abroad or the researchers that are able to work those global collaborative teams that I talked about that end up being the most successful. And definitely avoiding sort of condescending or superiority complex when you're going to certain parts of the world, even as a PhD or postdoc or a master's student attending an internship. Just be aware and be humble is the best advice I can give you. Some of the patterns that you might view as well as you're communicating is there are certain cultures where they're more focused on closing the deal, and that ties back into low context versus high context, right? They just want to get to the deal. I want to get to what I want to get versus the relationship building focus. So be aware of where your country and your region falls within that. The level of formality versus formal. Do people go by first name? We talked about that. The time and the emotional expressiveness or reservation in their ways. And this is one of my favorite sayings, and I'm going to butcher it, but basically, it's from a Chinese proverb, and I think it says it best, because when you're preparing for an international assignment, enter village and follow customs. It's the best where local sensitivities. Do your homework. I'm a big believer. I used to do a lot of work on due diligence, and I've mentioned this before in other presentations for mergers and acquisitions. The due diligence is your homework. Do your homework, research, talk to people, be involved in clubs. If it's language, pick up a couple of phrases, research, show effort. And I think by honoring the local customs and nuances and the habits and the traditions of your target country, your host country, it's going to set you apart. You're going to be a good ambassador for your school, for your own background, however you identify. You'll be representing, right, yourself and people of your background, and then adjusting your style, really. So based on what you research and understanding that deeper section of that cultural iceberg. So not everything is what it appears to be. What drives people? How do people work? Really think about that in an intelligent way and in a reflective way as you're getting ready for your assignment. I did some research, and UNC Charlotte has some great resources. I know there's a whole tab from the Career Center dedicated on international jobs and assignments that some of you guys may have already. So there's options for international exploration, internships. Then they have this app that I was looking at called Going Global, and it allows you to research international jobs and internships. And I'm sure through your department or your particular discipline, you can find out about particular opportunities. Nowadays with the internet and LinkedIn, you can do a lot of the networking and self-branding and self-promotion of what you're trying to do yourself as well. So rely on the university resources, on the Career Center, on the multicultural clubs or international clubs that might be on campus. And organizations in Charlotte as well that have partnerships abroad. I do some work with the Latin American Coalition here in Charlotte, International House. There's a lot of organizations that you can get involved if you have the time. I know that's tough as a grad student, but if you have the time to connect, you find out about opportunities abroad. Just really try and maximize your utilization of the resources that are your disposal. And I always like to conclude with some recommended reading. These are some great books that I recommend if they have an Atkins library, or if you have time, again, graduate students, the last thing you want to do is be assigned reading. But, I just think I've talked about this in other presentations, is continuous learning. Be a continuous learner. It does not end when you graduate from this program. Wherever you go to work, people or leaders, especially if you want to become a leader, they're going to expect you to continue to learn, right? And continue to talk to, hey, I read this really good article. I read this really good book about doing this. When you're if you're interviewing for that international internship, if you can just say, yeah, I read this chapter on, when cultures collide, that led to, this guy, Richard Lewis, and how, something that talks to the effect that you've prepared, you've done your homework, you're self-motivated, you're ambitious, you really want to get out there and show them that you've done kind of your homework, So these are really great books on the subject. Now, something I wanted to do, if we have time, Jill, is, I don't know how we're doing time-wise, but there was an exercise that I wanted to do. If you guys are able to, or maybe I can, if you're obviously you're on a computer. So if you want to choose one of these two cases, they're publicly available. They're from Harvard Business Review, but they're available, publicly on their site. If you wanted to click on this, if we have time, on one of these, and either on your own with a partner, it might be a little bit tricky because I don't know if we have breakout rooms. Then pick one of these readings. And if we have time, I would love to have a couple of volunteers just talk to what they learned from these articles. And they're not big cases. The first one is pretty self-explanatory. You shouldn't have issues with it as grad students. So just read it and kind of report back with what you learned relative to what we discussed. So for example, the first one talks about cultural maps, concepts that we described, and kind of a conclusion of what you learned in the reading either one of these two articles. So again, Jill and Aura, I'm not sure if we're doing okay time-wise or how you guys want to manage it, but if we have one.
Yeah, I think what we could do is people could go and click on one of those links and read it. And maybe in the meantime, you could take a few questions.
Yes, let's see that.
So that we sort of maximize your time here. If you think they could read it in about 5 minutes, is that possible?
Yeah, I think so.
Because we have 30 minutes.
We can't click on the links though.
Right.
Otherwise, Google the first one.
Pasting them into chat room.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Bryce.
Oh yeah, cut and paste, put it in the chat. Yep. Can you see that one? Let's see. This one's not too bad. All right, do we have, oh, this one's an easy read, yeah. Do we have any questions? Anyone have any questions in the meantime? I know it was a lot of stuff. Some of it is more theory, but any questions? Is anyone actually considering an international assignment currently? I know with COVID-19, the stuff is probably still out there.
Ivanna, can I also suggest maybe stop sharing your screen and then the students, the cameras on to ask you questions.
Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect.
And even I'd invite all of you to put your cameras on if your head isn't buried in that case and you want to ask a question, why don't you turn your cameras on and introduce yourselves and ask your question.
Auntie, I've been looking at your lovely face during my presentation, so I love it. You're right there front and center.
Yes, I had a question. I was hoping you could discuss a bit more about the masculine culture versus the feminine culture and what that would look like, please.
Yeah, so this really comes down to, and this is a really good question, and it's very top of mind right now, especially for working women, right? So we have certain regions of the world still, unfortunately, right, where gender roles and gender norms are very, very different, right? And women in leadership roles are still, questioned, right? So it goes back to kind of what level of authority are you going to have maybe as a female lead of a research team? So just be aware of that. And, don't take it personally. And how do you adjust your style? At least if you're aware of it, like I'm functioning in an area where it's more, high, this high power distance. It's very rigid. It's very, when I say masculine, again, those are fluid, right? But it's more on the gender roles. So is it a society where it's still, there are certain functions where men are more respected in certain roles? I mean, we have that challenge even here too. When I was working on Wall Street, I was one of the only young females there. So I had to work 4 times, 5 times as hard to be taken as seriously as the guys that, were doing the same job essentially. So, I mean, that's a challenge, that I was in my 20s, this was in the 90s. So But there are some countries where it's more systemic, right? It's just institutionalized. So just be aware of that. And a good way to work around that is finding a mentor. So if you know it's an area where there's more restrictions on women, whether it's traveling alone or leading certain projects, just find a good mentor that can kind of serve as that support. But that's really what I meant by that, because that is something that it's unfortunate. We just have to be aware of it, Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Ivanna, there's one in the chat.
Okay.
About, in your opinion, does a culturalization make us lose our identity? And what are your recommendations for that feeling? Because you want to, adjust to the culture you're in, but we all have our own identities, and there's mental health costs to feeling like we're losing the things that make us us.
Yeah, and that's a really great question. So I'm hoping if you take a temporary assignment, it's not going to be that bad, because it's temporary by its nature. You're going to be there for a little while. I think that's a great question for someone who's an immigrant, or if you immigrated to a place, or if you feel like you want to take a long-term assignment. I know personally, having gone through it, both in my personal life and also with work, I don't think you ever lose your identity if you truly want to hold on to your heritage, your roots, and what you value. And acculturation, when I say you're going to go over there and adjust your style, it doesn't necessarily mean change who you are and how you communicate. If you're a very direct person and you want things done the way you want it to get done, and that's who you are, own that, but understand that you might have to tweak, right? You have to be flexible, be smart. If it's going to get you the outcome that you want, change your style while you're in that assignment. Don't change who you are, but change it to your benefit so you can accomplish what you want to drive out, right? Because at the end of the day, if it's research, you want to get to the result, you want the team functioning at the highest level. So again, it's a great question. But if you really look at studies that have done with immigrant populations, or even foreign service, or even international assignments, a lot of time the melting pot and what makes kind of society function in a wonderful way is, retain the elements that you value, but then become part of that greater good in society, right? Trying to grab the best. So that's a great question. You can probably write a thesis on that. That's a good one. Any other questions? Is there anyone that is looking, again, COVID, it's hard, but is anyone thinking about working or international grants or an international agency, or I don't know, anything internationally? No?
I wonder, Ivanna, if it's worth asking the question, especially in academia, but in STEM careers in general, these international experiences are really, really prized. So students will go out of their way to get these on their CVs.
Yes.
And get those experiences. Do you have any thoughts what they can do instead if in the next year or so they can't go out and get these international experiences abroad? Do you have any, thoughts on other things they could do to, enhance their attractiveness for opportunities?
Yeah. I think a great idea is to work for an international company here, right? So for example, at one point I was thinking of entering the Foreign Service. This was years ago, but I interned with the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, right? So I couldn't go abroad. I was too young to go abroad, but I did an internship. So what you might want to do is get something on your resume or in your CV with a company that has a global footprint or has a global, the global messaging or a mission here in Charlotte. Or if Charlotte doesn't have what you're looking for, you could do something in Atlanta. That's a big kind of global world-class city as well. You could do something in the Research Triangle area. So seek out kind of the flip side, right? Seek out an international company here, because then you'll be able to interact with, managers that are from all over. So say, for example, Siemens, right? If you do stuff with Siemens or some of the pharmaceuticals or biotech companies in the Triangle that might have their headquarters in Europe, or elsewhere, at least you'll get kind of that international feel while not having to travel over there, right? You're doing kind of the flip. So that would be my advice. Look for international international organizations here. I mean, DC, my gosh, we can, right? You're 5 hours, 6 hours away drive from Washington, DC. We've got a plethora of places that are looking, especially now, that are looking for summer interns with global agencies. I love DC. So if you're willing to stomach, or you can afford to do something where you're volunteering initially to get your foot in the door, unpaid, or maybe they'll give you a stipend or something, but you get your foot in the door and you get to put it in your resume, then do that. Then do that if you want to work for, an international agency like that. We're not that far from DC. You can do that in the summer. So that's another, but that's a great question. Yeah, you've got to kind of pivot a little bit, right? Because of what we're going through.
Or it's suggesting you can spend this time learning another language too.
Yes, that too. That too. I don't know how many of you are from somewhere else or traveled, but you automatically gain goodwill when you even attempt to say something in the target language, right? I know, Aura, you speak Russian. Do you speak it?
Well, my Russian is very bad right now. But yeah, I mean, I was just kind of thinking that, culture and language are so closely intertwined, and there's so much that you miss out on if you don't actually speak the language. It's stuff that you're just not gonna understand.
Yeah, that's true.
But I like what Amiante said here about especially the technical language, because that's, I studied Russian literature for a really long time, and learning the words to analyze the literature. I would know them in English, and you had to learn them in Russian. That's really difficult. And I'm sure whatever science you're studying, you would definitely want to learn those technical words in the foreign language. That would help you out hugely.
Yeah, without a doubt. Language, if you can get the language. The good news is that English continues to be the lingua franca. So that is even it helps. Obviously, if you know the language, that's great. But thankfully, right, English is still, so French continues to be the language of the diplomats, and English continues to be the language of the business and deal making. But yeah, the nuances of the language, if you understand it, or you show that you at least have shown an interest in it, that's a great way. You could take courses nowadays online while we're on pandemic, right, for free, or Coursera from really good universities too, or definitely be savvy about it. That's a great point. All right, has anyone finished the reading on either one? Is anyone brave? Anyone want to talk to it? I'm gonna call on people. And a lot of people have their cameras off. No, that's a big no-no. No. Who's got the camera off? I'm going to call on you if you have your camera off, because I can still see your name. Should I call on somebody? They won't come to my presentations anymore. I'm going to call on you. It's okay if you're in your PJs. I put on this suit just for you, but you're students, so I remember what it was like being a student. You can be in your PJs. Hi, Ivanna. All right, anyone that's brave? Did anyone read it? Raise your hand if you read one of the articles. These are easy peasy. You're grad students. Who read the first one? Anyone? Sol?
Yes, hello.
Hello. I love your name. It means sun in Spanish.
Yes, I heard that a lot from my friends, especially from Mexico. Yeah. Thank you.
Did you read the article?
Oh, yes, I did. Just briefly.
Okay. Did you want to comment on what you read, or anything that stuck out from the case?
Yes, I found it very interesting to read through. I agree with what the reporters wrote down in this article, especially when you will see have a different perspective when you're coming from the different cultural backgrounds and countries, and then the way you see, for example, Indians as a Korean will be very different from the views when you're a Brazilian and looking at US for Indian perspective. So I also kind of agree with the point where I had an experience having the American advisor as well as having an Indian advisor.
Okay.
Whenever they're having a meeting, we get into a very different route of conversation. So my American advisor would usually go straight to the point and then like talk about the center of the issues and then like problem or what we will do the next week. Whereas when I have my advisor from India, she would like to discuss about more like a things like cultural things, like more emotional in approaching the problem, or like try to let me like allow understand like what are the situation and how can we solve it. So I like either way, like enjoying their these meeting times, having like different cultural background. So that was very interesting.
That's great. That was a great example. And thanks for going first. So I will remember your name for a long time. Thank you. That was great. Does anyone else want to make a comment? Yes. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Ivanna. Thank you so much for that presentation. So actually, I'm from Ghana, so I think that was very helpful.
Oh my God, one of my favorite, one of my best friends from undergrad was from Ghana.
Oh, nice. Yeah, so I was kind of switching and looking at so many things, and it kind of made me have like a really good understanding of so many things that happen. But just from the cultural intelligence article, I remember that there was a particular time. So, like when I came to the US first, so in Ghana, one thing that we did was that we were, I don't want to say maybe more frank with our feedback compared to the way I saw things in the US. So, if, for example, someone said something and even someone didn't totally agree with it, they would politely say here and be like, oh, I would have thought differently. But in Ghana, would be like, oh, no, you're wrong. So, when we had some German exchange students come in, and like that was one comment they also got. So when I saw in the article about the American, how do you call it, manager and thinking that the Germans were being rude, I was like, it just reminded me of that time where I and my friends were like, oh, we would have been more direct in our countries. We would have said this way and all that. I was like, oh, some of
Yeah,
these things are very interesting. Yeah.
it's a very good example. Yeah, I mean, and you'd be surprised. I mean, sometimes if we're not aware of the differences, that can stall deals. That can stall just fundamental business deals, research projects, just because of that miscommunication or misunderstanding. I've been just amazed how the people side affects the organizational side, affects the outcomes, and you're really managing human behavior, even if it's a merger and acquisition, and no matter how fancy or what transaction or research project, at the end of the day, it's people working together. So that's great. Thanks for sharing that example. Anyone else? We still have a little bit more time. Hey, Ivanna.
Hi. So I'm originally from Laos, which is a country in Southeast Asia, and I didn't live there very long. I left as a child, but culturally, the people of Laos are just very relaxed, and they don't work to live. They live to work. Well, the other way. They don't live to work. They work to live, and they go about their day. A couple years ago, I had an opportunity to go to Brazil for a summer to do some research. And I remember I was really excited. I got there and I'm talking to the boss and we're talking about the work schedule. And I'm like, I can be here at 7:30 every day and I'll work until like 7. I'm so excited. Like when I get started on a project, that's how I am. But he was like, hold on a minute, we'll get some work done, but we really need to enjoy things. It was really interesting to me because it kind of felt culturally like home for me. I'm not from Brazil, right? But just being around a different culture, a working culture, so contrary to what I'm used to here in the US, like it almost felt like being around people who were like where I'm from, which was really cool.
Yeah. And that's interesting that sometimes it's not nationality based, it's more behavior. So you can have parts of the world that might be separated geographically, but just in those dimensions, they're more similar. And also it's how you approach a new team or a new assignment, right? Because if you're putting together a team and you've got people from kind of different areas or different parts of the world, and you're more of the gung-ho who's going to come in, blazing, like, I want to get this done. I mean, I've seen that experience sometimes even personally in a work situation. I was working with some colleagues in Europe and even in London. And, we're coming in and we're like, we're going to do this and I'm going to get it done. And you're working till midnight and you turn people off because they're like, wow, our pace is not the same. Slow your horses, let's work on, so you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of that. So, and the same with the flip side, right? Like sometimes if you're too focused on driving out the result, you might miss out the bigger picture. So if someone is more of the analytical person that's, just be, it's a matter of being aware. But yeah, that's interesting. So Laos and Brazil have that in common. That's interesting. Anyone else that wants to share an experience? I know what I love about UNC Charlotte is just so diverse. So diverse. It reminds me a lot of the school I went to in New York for undergrad. So diverse. Love it. We got people from all over. Anyone else thinking international or feels comfortable sharing anything? Our professors? Let's see. Venki, did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's good. Venki.
That's
So that's one thing when I arrived here. So my actual name is really big, it's Venkatesh. So even most Indians cannot pronounce it properly. So the first year I used to say, my name is Venkatesh, you can call me Venki. And my friends still make fun of me because that was the first sentence I said to everyone I met. But now it's just Venki. So I was reading this article, the cultural intelligence one, and I found this really interesting because I was thinking about this. I thought about this like a few years ago, that people who are actually very well adjusted to their own cultures do not fare well when they go to a different country. That's what is written here. So people who are somewhat detached from their own culture can more easily adopt the modes and even the body language of an unfamiliar host. And I saw this. So I spent 2 semesters in Korea, in Seoul Park's country. 안녕하세요. 잘 지내세요. So that's all the Korean I know.
Nice, very good.
Thank you. So I spent like 10 months there, and this is what I observed so I went with a cohort of exchange students, and I observed this, so I knew some Indians there, and the people who were really popular back home weren't able to assimilate that well. So this was really interesting to me.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. Have you guys heard of the concept third culture kids or third culture people? So sometimes a lot of the children of either military, right? We have that in common, or diplomats, or kids that, you were born somewhere, but then you lived in different places. It's not that you become detached of that original place, but you're able to assimilate better because your exposure, right? So you pick up a little bit without losing that original identity. But I think you're right. I think the less ingrained you are in where you are from, how you identify with, I think the more versatile you are. So the fact that you had that experience in Korea, and then you're probably gonna have, you're here, right? So you had the experience in Korea, having your background, and living here in the U.S.
Yes.
I mean, so you experience kind of that they call them it's TCK, third culture kids, or third culture students, or third culture individuals. You're kind of stuck, but you're very flexible because you're able to, integrate yourself and go with the flow and learn from each unique experience. I love the fact that it was hard as a teenager moving around and everything else, but I think it makes you pretty versatile, So anyone else any other examples before we run out of time about the article? Or was it useful what we talked about, or was it too theory based? Because I want to make sure the presentations, I usually go into a lot of detail, and I like doing research and kind of marrying practical with theory, but any other feedback or questions?
Yes, I have a quick question.
I think Olawasian had a question. I might be butchering your name. I apologize if I am.
No, you actually did very, very well. It's can you hear me?
I hear you. Yep, I got my
Okay,
headphones.
great. So yes, my name is Oluwaseun. So you are 95% correct in the pronunciation. So I have a question, and then I have a comment also. And when Andrew actually talked about his experience, it brought to mind my own experience also. Because growing up, I grew up in Nigeria, but I had a couple of international experiences, especially in Ghana. So I had people. I joined an international organization, ISEC, and we sort of congregated in Ghana at the point in time. Hong Kong, Chinese, and we're all talking about HIV/AIDS. So that was my first experience working with the international community. And what he said really echoed the experience I had, because Ghanaians will tell you, no. They'll just go to the point. But I had a German friend, Marius, and he was a little more calmer, rounder on the edges, and so somewhat like that. But my question is this: so you now join an international organization, and they have very different work ethics compared to yours. How do you manage it? For example, by 12 noon, everybody goes out for coffee, but that's the time when you are where you feel you do better at work, or everybody just sort of finishes work by 2 p.m. and they just hang out between 2 and 4 or 5. So how do you undo that, and you don't feel out of the circle and quote?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, when I was with Morgan Stanley, again, we were a global company, and I went to London a couple of times. And it was different in that the way even they did lunch, they would drink during lunch. So, you know, it was a very guy kind of environment, the trading floor. And they're like, oh, we're going to go to the pub for lunch and knock back a cup. And there's something as basic as that. And me, as a young female working in an environment that was quite, I'm like, I don't feel quite comfortable drinking. You know, I just didn't grow up drinking when you go to lunch. You know, you got to keep it very professional. You don't go to the pub in the middle of the day. So, you know, I would go, but then I would have what I normally would have, right? My soda or my Coke. So something like that. So if you feel like something is just not your way and you just work better with the way you work, it's okay to say, this is how I work, right? And I'm not going to completely change that. So maybe you go to the event, but you tweak what you consume, right? Because you're not used to drinking during the workday. So that's just one example that I can remember now off the top of my head. But at the end of the day, I don't, if you work a certain way and it's your style, I'll emphasize again, you don't have to change who you are and what you value and your work style. Just be aware how you communicate or how it's impacting your ability to be, you know, effective with your team. So if it's in the way you speak, you're turning people off at the table or on your research team to getting the work done that needs to get done, that you want to get done, then you need to tweak it and be smart enough to be savvy during that moment in time, you know, adjust it somehow. I mean, don't change who you are, but be aware of the differences. I think the worst thing you can do is not be aware, right? And I think Americans, we have that reputation where it's like, you know, it's like in the US, we do it this way and that's it. So just, again, reflect and be aware, but don't necessarily change what your values are or your work, you know, or, so I've faced that a couple of times, but that's probably the one that it's coming top of mind quickly. Kind of just something as simple as that, socializing during the workday, or your focus on deadlines. When I was working even as a project manager, I mean, I'm hard driving. I can be really like, you know what, if I need to get something done, I need to get it done, right? Which is good, but that can also be negative in the sense that you have to adjust to pace. You have to adjust with the way people work together, and you can turn people off if you're not careful. So, you know, it's a balancing act. There's no perfect answer, but you should never compromise your ethics or your values and how you work, especially if you're good at what you do, right? Because they hired you for you, even if it's a multinational. But just be savvy, I guess. Just be aware, be literate. You've done your homework, you can talk to that. Even telling them that you're aware of the differences will make you look smart, because you're telling them, look, I know we're different this way, but this is how I do things. And this is, you know, I think that'll make you stand out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any questions or comments? Alex, I'm looking at you. You're very quiet. I'm calling on people. What did you think?
Hi.
Did you enjoy the presentation?
Yes, thank you very much for coming out and for the presentation. I do have a comment. So I myself am an immigrant from Ukraine. I moved to the United States in 2014, and I saw there was a question earlier if acculturation makes us lose our identity. And what I noticed for myself that it doesn't. You just kind of pick up things that you like the most from different cultures. So I keep my traditions from Ukraine, but I also picked up some traditions from US, and some I like more, some I like less. Yeah, that's basically it.
Well, that's good. That's really good. Welcome. That's 4 years. That's great. Do you like Charlotte?
Yes, I do like Charlotte. It's too hot here, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think
that's a great question.
I think we're at 5:30, and I want to respect everyone's time, but please join me in thanking Ivanna.
Thank you. This was enjoyable, guys.
And as I said in the beginning, join us again next week for another STEM communication lecture, and think about tomorrow, which where Ivanna will be introducing our speaker, Kim Henderson.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
One more quick thing. So it's Novant Health, right? And I think there's 60 people signed up. This is a good opportunity. This is a powerhouse in the healthcare industry, right? An operating revenue of billions of dollars. This is basically, the speaker is the right hand to the CEO of the Novant system. So if you do have an interest in healthcare and you want to ask questions and get noticed, not so much when she's giving the presentation, but during the breakout at the end, just do your homework a little bit if you have time. It's very easy nowadays on your phone or while you're doing whatever. Do your homework on the organization and come prepared to ask smart questions that show that you've done your homework. That's my advice.
Excellent advice. Thank you. Thanks
All right,
so much for joining. Great to see all your faces today. Hope you're all staying well and have a great evening.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Aura. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.